Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session on Future Generali's Master Speak. And thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are connecting with us for the first time, I would like to share that the idea behind Master Speak comes from one of our core values: live the community. The present situation has left many of us worried as to how the future would pan out post COVID. There are many questions with respect to fate of businesses, careers, health, and life in general, but none of us have all the answers. And MasterSpeak is our effort to help our customers, partners, and community at large find some of these answers and be prepared for a better tomorrow. So, how do we do that? We draw upon the wisdom of some of the great leaders, thinkers, and professionals who have in their careers built great organizations or helped transform lives of people they have worked with despite adversities and tough times. Today, we are going to talk about impact of COVID-19 on advertising and marketing services and how can digital transformation act as an accelerator for your growth in post-COVID world. We have amongst us today a grandmaster, if I may. He is someone who needs no introduction as the name is enough. Naam to suna hi hoga, as a very famous dialogue in Hindi goes. It's my pleasure to introduce Sir Martin Sorrell, who's the executive chairman of S4 Capital, which is building a purely digital advertising and marketing services business for global, multinational, regional, local clients and millennial-driven influencer brands. Sir Martin was CEO of WPP for 33 years, building it from pound 1 million shell company in 1985 into world's largest advertising and marketing services company. We will watch him in conversation with Anant Rangaswamy today. Anant Rangaswamy is currently the editor of Melt, the advertising media and marketing show on WIO and TV. Previously, Anant was editor of Storyboard on CNBC TV 18 and founding editor of Campaign India and senior editor at ForcePost.com. Now, Anant tells me that he has interviewed Sir Martin nearly 50 times. So I can't wait to catch this conversation between the two of them. With that, I would like to thank Sir Martin and Anant for joining us today. Over to you both.
Yeah. Hi, Sir Martin. How are you?
I am extremely well, Anna. I'm in rude health. How are you?
Good. So we'll cut to the chase. So I said, I want you to transport yourself to 26th June 2021.
Yeah.
And tell me, what is the marketer doing today?
Well, very good question. You asked the easy questions first, Anand. My own view, and I've been consistently bullish.
Right.
I'm not V-shaped. I'm reverse square root, if you can figure that one out. But I'm certainly more V-shaped than most. I mean, there will be categories that are V-shaped and U-shaped and W-shaped and L-shaped. There'll all be different shapes. The V-shaped ones will be the areas that we inhabit, thankfully, at S4, very much around digital. But I think Q2 of 2020 is the bottom. In our own case, April was the weakest month so far of 2020. In January, we were up 33% top line, then 21% in February, and then 6% in March, and 3% in April. I can't tell you what we did in May, but I can tell you that it was significantly better than April. So I think that was the bottom, and I think June will be better. So Q3, I think, will be relatively better than Q2, and Q4 will be relatively better than Q3. And that takes us in to 2021 and your question with that as background. So I think by this time next year, things will not return to normal, because they will never be normal, or for at least for a very significant period of time. There will be a new normal.
Right.
There won't even be a next normal. This is totally different to what we've seen before. Coronavirus was or is more like wartime than it is the great financial recession or the dot-com bust or the oil price busts that we've seen before, right, or what's happened in the early 90s, the early 1990s, when we had a global recession. So I think that the nature of it is very different. But by this time next year, I'm certain that things will have not normalized, because everything we've seen, Anand, has accelerated within COVID-19. The consumers are buying more online. Facebook have invested in Mukesh Ambani's Jio in India, and that will drive more digital transformation in retail and small business, particularly when Facebook has Facebook jobs and shops that they're developing in the context of their platform. So consumers shop online, they take their healthcare online, they do their financial services online, they communicate online, they educate online. Media owners are escalating their digital transformation from traditional, newspaper titles in Australia are dropping like flies as people like Rupert Murdoch and others really move to digital models, as you well know, which are not just advertising based, but subscription based too, with paywalls. Or the streamers start to attack even more strenuously free-to-air TV. So a market like India, which is still dominated by newspapers and magazines and by free-to-air television, will change significantly too. And the third area, enterprises that have been somewhat hesitant to digitally transform themselves historically, because it was a status quo where they could maintain, a steady progress, top line growth with GDP growth at 2 or 3 or 4%, lower your costs, buy back some stock. You could grow your EPS by 5 to 10%. That is now gone because of coronavirus. In Q2, which companies will be reporting on in early July and into August, will be a bloodbath. So I think by this time next year, I don't want to give the impression that things will be normalized in an old-fashioned sense. They will be the new normal, the next normal that we will be focusing on, and that will be a normal that is dominated by digital. The FT ran a story this morning, finally woke up to the fact that digital is going to be more than 50% of media spend worldwide this year. Last year, media spend was about, advertising spend was about $550 to $600 billion. This year, on balance, it will probably be down about 10 to 15%, with traditional being down as much as 15, 20, 25, 30% in various segments, but digital will be flat. But digital's share of total media spend will be about 250 billion, which will be about half the market. So for the first time, so the FT says, on the basis of the data that came out from Group M and Magna, for the first time, digital will be more than half the market. We estimate by 2022 that digital will be 57.5%. And Michael Nathanson, who's a well-known media analyst in the States, I think he forecasts by 2024 it'll be 2/3. So that's, you will see, and at this time next year, our clients will be driving more money into digital media, and probably reducing significantly their spending in traditional media.
So tell me, how is the marketer going to retool himself? Because for 2 decades now, the marketer is used to, at least in India, the marketer is used to being completely reliant on the 30-second commercial. Everything else was a long tail. So how does the marketer retool himself or herself?
Well,
we've got a lot of women marketers in India.
Keep it balanced. Yes. Not enough women marketers. We should have more. But the question is, it's a new model. I mean, I'm talking my own book. S4 is purely digital. The second key principle is that we built the model around first-party data. That's data that is owned by the consumers about you and me. They don't know I'm Martin or you're Anant. We're an IP
they have
address,
it.
but they know what our media habits are. They know what we like to purchase, what we don't like to purchase, and they can serve us tailored creative, what we call personalization at scale, which in the case, for example, of a Netflix, who we work for, we might create about 1.5 million different executions. And we know Anand likes cricket, so we'll serve him an ad which compares Narcos 3 to sports, or a football match, or a cricket, whatever his that. Or we know he's been on a business site, wsj.com or fd.com, and we'll serve him an ad that compares Narcos 3 to a business. So it's using first-party data to create content at scale, personalization at scale, which we then pump out programmatically, and we measure your response. So it's not a perfectly tailored commercial of 30 seconds or 60 seconds or whatever that takes 3 months to create. It's a big idea driving creative at scale, refined by data. This concept in our industry, amongst the fuddy-duddies in our industry who look back with rose-tinted spectacles to the days of Don Draper, this thought that data destroys creativity is nonsense. It refines creativity. It helps creativity. It helps make creativity even more effective and efficient.
Right.
And so that's key. So the model has changed, Anna, and that's the direction. So again, going back to your first question, in a year's time, Procter & Gamble, arguably still the world's largest advertiser. You listen to Mark Pritchard. He talks about 1.2, 1.3 billion consumer profiles that he has. He talks about how he can create content at scale internally or with an embedded agency model or outsourced. And he talks about how he can target media even more effectively. So he's building, in my view, sort of the Netflix model inside Procter. So it's where CPG is meeting tech and becoming intertwined. But it's a new model, and it needs different thinking. And this is a jab, but I'll make it. I don't think the traditional holding companies that still, from a share point of view, dominate the old industry. They don't dominate the new industry. They dominate the traditional half of the industry, still don't understand the profound change that has taken place. And if they do understand it, they find it difficult to adapt because they have the weight, the albatross around their necks of their traditional businesses. And they can't shake loose from that. It's very difficult to do. You see it in every industry. You see it in the auto industry. It's the Tesla problem. How do you compete with Elon Musk and a company which is totally devoted to the new, to electric cars, which are clearly the future and clearly are going to become more and more important? How do you adapt and at the same time deal with gasoline and hybrids and whatever? You're weighed down by that. So I've seen it in my own case. Since I left WPP 2 or so years ago, you're not burdened with the traditional structure, and you have a clean sheet of paper, and on which you can develop or draw or paint your own new enterprise. And that's what we're doing with Media Monks around content, and what we're doing with Mighty Hive around data and analytics.
Martin, you're talking about the changes in your side of the business. What about the changes that are required on the marketer side of the business? Are they equipped to deal with the changes at the speed that you seem to suggest they will have to?
Well, there's not much good that has come out of COVID-19, but if I was to point to something that is more positive about COVID-19, it is that it has driven that digital disruption and transformation. So I mentioned consumers. I mentioned media owners, and the third category was enterprise managers. Let's call them enterprise managers. The people that are running enterprise businesses that perhaps were hesitant to transform their businesses because they didn't want to cause disruption. Now, as I said before, all bets are off. So what they're focused on, and I see and hear this, we have seen in the last 3 months very significant changes in major clients about their attitude to digital transformation and change. You know, we can talk about agility, flexibility. Our third principle, after being purely digital and that holy trinity model of data driving content and programmatic, our third principle is faster, better, cheaper. Faster, or speed, quality, value, which is slightly more elegant. Faster or speed is about agility. And every company we deal with, every analog company that is trying to digitally transform is anxious to be as agile and flexible as possible. The CEOs of these companies, their CMOs, their CFOs, their CTOs, their chief technology officers, are all razor keen to shift and move as quickly as possible. COVID-19 is the burning platform. COVID-19 has driven these companies, I think, to change more. We had our twice yearly review with one of our big relationships, one of our big platform relationships yesterday. And we were talking, they have noticed too, and we had a similar review with one of our big software relationships, one of the big software companies. And both the platform and the software company both said they have noticed very significant increase in what we would call change agent activity inside companies. Companies now, CEOs, all bets are off. There is no status quo to protect. They might as well get on with it. And if you have costs that you have to write off, usually non-cash costs, that you're shy to do that because that would reduce your profitability. Now, because in Q2, as we'll see in the results in July and August, has been so desperately bad, there is nothing to lose. So the drive for change is very significant. So I think the answer to your question is there is now significant desire amongst local, regional, multinational, global clients to change. The marginal propensity to change has gone up like that as a result of COVID-19.
So, okay, considering you're talking to a largely India audience, can you share with me names of 2 or 3 companies in India that you believe are getting it right?
Well, obviously, a shining example of that is Reliance. You know, right. I think it's an extraordinary achievement. I mean, if we were faced in our industry with somebody who was giving it away for free, if you like, you know, and had spent 18 or 19 or 20 billion, whatever the figure was, on building a network and propagated it on the basis that he or she were performing a social service, in other words, providing connection to people,
right?
Yeah, but giving people the ability to communicate, that is hugely difficult to compete with. Now, to compound it, what he then does is bring in people like Facebook, people like General Atlantic, people like Silver Lake, people like KKR to further fund the development. Reduces his debt, which he's built up in part by expanding the geo network, and gets, you know, and does if I understand the rights issue, it's a deferred payment plan as well, because taking into account COVID-19. So brilliantly executed, in my view. So that would be one example.
Now, give me some analog manufacturing companies or names like that.
I mean, my Godrej, I think, is a company which I've always admired, and I think has always had a very strong understanding of the sort of personal dynamics. I mean, for example, when Godrej expands out of India, it takes minority stakes or less than necessarily controlling stakes and builds up the position over time, whilst respecting the local needs as well as the global needs or global opportunities. Anand Mahindra, Mahindra would be another example. You asked for 3 examples. Those are 3 examples. Sunil Mittal at Airtel, although he's had to face the pressure from Reliance and from Jio, because I think you're going to see, and it's been rumored in the press, that there might be alliances with Airtel and indeed with Vodafone and Idea, which has been a difficult deal to consummate and to do. So these moves throw up, if Facebook moves, what does Google do? What does Amazon do? What do the Chinese do? I mean, that raises all sorts of other issues, obviously political issues too, but what does an Alibaba do around in relation to an Indian market? What does a Tencent do? What does the new entrant, TikTok, what do they do? They just hired Kevin Mayer, one of the senior most executives or the number 2 before at Disney. He's left and he's the CEO of TikTok and the COO of ByteDance. So that's a major move. So all these things create ripples, but those are the examples of the Bharti pharmaceutical business. Right. All these things, I mean, they are great Indian companies, which I think, historically they've tended to be purely Indian because they're such a big domestic market. You have 1.2 billion, and in a few years' time, it will be the most populous country on the planet. If I was an Indian entrepreneur, I'd be saying to myself, let me satiate my objectives in India first and then go outside India. But obviously, Indian companies, as they become more and more powerful and successful, will start to spend more time and invest more money on outside Indian investments. And the other thing, right, of course, is, which I think is a big opportunity, because there are threats to globalization, and because many people believe that deglobalization is an issue that we have to face, and because the COVID-19 has threatened global supply chains, obviously India as an alternative home for supply chain and supply in general, India becomes a much more enticing prospect. So, right, the tough stuff for India is, how do you deal with COVID-19, and has COVID-19 made it more difficult for India? I don't call India a developing country, I call it a fast-growing market, but is it more difficult now for the developing markets such as India and Brazil to keep up with the developed markets or catch up with the developed markets? Or because of the changes around supply chain, etc., will it make it easier for India to do that? So it's going to be very interesting to see. My personal belief is that China and India's position will be enhanced by what's going on. So as I look at S4, which is 70% North and South America, 20% Western Europe, and only 10% Asia, I want to go to 40, 20, 40. So I want to keep Western Europe as it is. We have to be bigger in Western Europe, but I think Western Europe has big challenges. I think Germany, that's the strongman of Europe, but France, Italy, Spain, the UK have challenges. I think North and South America, a big believer in that bookend. The other bookend is Asia Pacific. And within the the Pacific continents, within those, India and right, China are the lead markets for me.
Right. So, Martin, I'll ask you one more question before Rakesh takes you through the audience questions. which is, tell me, how do you see travel for yourself in the next year?
Well,
do you see yourself traveling less, more? Because you've been a crazy traveler.
I feel much better for the last 3 months having been locked down, Anna. It's not that I miss coming to see you in Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore or wherever it happens to be. I think what my pattern is going to change. I think I will do longer trips, but fewer of them. So I will do more of this. I will not, at the drop of a hat, rush off somewhere and exhaust myself and other people by doing so. I think I will be much more focused. I just give you one story from a call I was on with a large number of CEOs. And there was the head of a global hotel company, the head of an airline, and the head of a fast food operation, multiple brands, all global companies. The head of the hotel company said, everybody will go back to booking hotels. The head of the airline company said, everybody will go back to booking airline tickets, business, leisure, whatever. The head of the fast food company said, my travel budget has gone to nothing. It will not go back to more than 50% of what it was before. I think you are going to see significant changes in business travel, less of it, more use of technology, and the technology will get better and better. It will be beam me down, Scotty. I'm convinced that at some point in time, we will technologically get to the stage. I mean, this experience is a good experience. It can
Absolutely.
it will be even better. And then from a leisure point of view, I think people will focus more on domestic markets, at least until we get an adequate vaccine. So I think there will be significant changes, and we will have more working from home. We will have more reconfigured office space. We had a meeting, we had our daily meeting of our key people, our 8 key people. And yesterday we went through our property portfolio. We have 43 leases. We're in a number of cities. We're in 43 cities. In a number of cities, we have multiple leases. We are going to one lease in each city. And what we're doing is going to consolidate. We'll consolidate with lower footprints. We'll have more working from home. We'll have more flexibility on commuting, at least at the beginning. If that proves to be unpopular or people uncomfortable, I don't think it will be, then we'll obviously modify it. But, to give you a concrete example, I think New York and Chicago will be under pressure. I think Boston, because of its biosciences and tech base, and Silicon Valley and Denver and Austin will be more in demand. So the patterns of office space and living are going to change.
Right, Sir Martin. So I'll take your leave right now because you've got audience wanting to ask you questions.
Okay.
So as always, good to see you and thank you. And I'll catch up at the end of the show.
Okay, fine.
Thank you so much.
Good.
Right. Yeah, Rakesh.
Yes. Thank you very much, Anand, for kickstarting this session. I was enjoying this conversation thoroughly, and I'm sure our audience out there are having fun as well listening to you both. So it's time for us to pick up the questions from audience. I see a bunch of questions coming through, but before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that we've got another about 30 minutes before the end of the show. So keep your questions coming, and remember that 2 lucky questions that you all will ask us will be called out at the end of the session, and will receive a gift voucher from us. So keep your questions coming for me to ask them of Sir Martin on the show today. So, Sir Martin, the first question that I see on my panel, and you sort of alluded to this point in your conversation, that there will be profound changes as a result of COVID, and new paradigms will emerge. So in the context of products and services, what do you see disappearing from the world as we know of it today?
Well, did you say disappearing?
Yes.
I've mentioned travel and leisure. They're not going to disappear, but they're going to change. I mean, I can't think of, I think newspapers in their traditional form, in their physical form, when you think about how inefficient that is, felling trees and distributing newsprint, which is environmentally unfriendly too. I can't see that in the newer digital world that they will survive in those forms. So that would be, and I think magazines come under the same pressure, although there is some evidence, for example, that women are attuned to magazine reading and like it a lot. So that's an area where I see radical change. But I think the way of describing it much better is say what is the V-shaped activity? Where is it? So all the tech activity, online shopping, online education, online healthcare, online financial payment systems, online communication. That's obviously one area which is very V-shaped. Healthcare, I mentioned that in the context of online. Again, COVID-19, if I can put it this way, plays to healthcare's strengths. In-home entertainment, gaming, again, plays to the strengths. The U-shaped areas are going to be areas of packaged goods. Procter has done very well in Q1, had a record quarter. We'll see how they do in Q2, but my guess is they will continue to do well. They jettisoned their food business under A.G. Lafley many years ago. Unilever still have a food business. They're challenged on the food service side with hotels and the like, and institutional food supply. And obviously the ice cream business has suffered because of lack of distribution, but their cleaning portfolio, detergents, etc., personal care, has benefited. Nestle, again, picture is varied, but they've done very well too, as have Colgate and Mondelez and others. So what you're seeing, I think, in packages, or Reckitt Benckiser doing very well because of its product portfolio. So that's sort of more V-shaped in some categories, maybe more U-shaped in the others. Autos, very challenged in the midst of COVID-19, but they will come back. You see it in China. Dangerous to extrapolate Chinese experience to the rest of the world because, in comparison to India, it's a much more autocratic, obviously, system, a much less democratic system. But having said that, the trend is there. And as the automobile showrooms open up, and indeed, as we start to see more direct distribution, more online distribution of automobiles and online ordering and design. And I've seen some virtual reality, augmented reality executions, which will enable me as a consumer to order and buy a car online, which has clear implications, pushed by Amazon in that particular case that I saw at CES. You'll see even automobile distribution will change very significantly. So in terms of disappearing, I think there will be travel and leisure is going to be very challenged. It's going to be, I think, more L-shaped or a very deep, flat-bottomed U. But I don't think there will be many things that disappear in their entirety. Working from home, as I've said, is going to become more and more important, particularly to our young workforce. Our people on the media side are about average age 25, on the content side about 32. There are 2,550 of them. We're really listening to what they want to do. They want more flexible commuting time. They want to be in the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week. They want to spend more time with clients. They want to embed themselves in the clients, or if we're doing in-housing, be on the client premises. So it's going to vary.
Thank you, Sir Martin, for that. I think there is a question from our audience, Saurabh. I think it takes on from what you mentioned in your conversation with Anant, and also referring to the automobile example. You mentioned that big traditional businesses having to compete with new age data-driven, tech-intense businesses. An example that you took was Tesla. Saurabh's question is, would you suggest that companies, traditional big companies, must not now shy away from self-destructing, what traditionally has worked for them? And if not, then how do you really transform with speed? And if yes, where should they start from?
Well, it's a really difficult question to answer, which is, I guess, why it was asked in the first place. If I go back to my time at WPP, I for 33 years, I tried to run WPP, and WPP is in exactly that position. It's probably more marked today than it was when I left. When I left, it had a market cap of 16 billion pounds. It now has a market cap of 8 billion pounds. The holding companies have, I heard somebody saying recently, the holding companies have lost $50 billion of value. I look at our own S4 Capital. We're worth $1.5 billion on the stock exchange. Our share price has risen by 125%, whilst WPP's has fallen by 50%. So you look at that and you wonder, now we have the advantage of being purely digital. We can present ourselves, and it's not presentation, it's reality. We are a 150% digital business. During COVID, we have continued to grow. April was the bottom in terms of our growth rate. I'm talking about organic growth. I'm not talking about growth with deals. I'm talking about organic growth rate. We've committed to the market, or not committed to the market, we said our plan is to double the size of the company in 3 years, which means, if you do it mathematically, a 24% growth rate. We think this year, despite COVID-19, we will grow, we've said double digits. So it's organic growth. Most of the holding companies, or all of them, are talking about being down this year 10 to 15%. So obviously, if you're digital only, you have a spectacular advantage. And I have to say that in maybe 3, 4, or 5 years' time, we will be faced with the same dilemma, that change will continue at a very rapid pace. And maybe some of the things we do today will be regarded as analog and not digital in the future. So we will have to pivot, and we'll have to watch very carefully over the coming years the directions in which we're going. So it's very difficult to do. If I look at the holding companies, and if I look at WPP, there is a bad bank, if I can use the financial analogy from the last Great Recession. There's a bad bank at WPP. There's stuff that isn't growing or that is declining, and there's a good bank. There's the stuff that's growing. I don't know what the relative proportions are, but I would have said, because it's changed, I think, over the last 2 years, they've got rid of control of their data business, which in India, I'm told, is doing quite well, Kantar, under the new ownership of Bain Capital. But basically, I would have said when I was there, probably there was 40% of the business, which I would count as being digital, that was in the good bank category. The only way to answer the question head on in relation to the holding companies, the only way that they can change, in my view, is you privatize them, you take them out of the public markets, or an activist comes in and says, for example, this morning in the FT, in the Financial Times, Lex column says Capgemini has twice the market PE that WPP and Publicis have. So somebody may take the view, I'll go in and I'll try and get rid of the bad bank and concentrate on the good bank, on the good parts of the business. But the only way, so to come back to your question, you can only do it by, in my view, by separating the good parts and the bad parts. Maybe you try and sell off the bad parts, or you ring fence them in some way through privatization or whatever. That's the only way. And I used to, when I was at WPP, use the analogy, the cannibalization argument. If you don't eat your children, somebody else will. That post-COVID-19 is even more relevant. And everybody we talk to, without exception, is in total agreement that COVID-19 has accelerated these trends. So if it was important in January or December of last year, it's double or triply important today. And you will not, one other thing, you will not change these businesses. You know, what Warren Buffett said was very true. When good management comes in contact with the bad business wins. By importing a consultant. And when you import a consultant, you must check the references. It may sound an enigmatic comment, but it's an important comment. You must check the references. But importing a consultant into a traditional business will not change it. Well, it has to be much more radical change than that. It has to be structural change. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but I think at the end of the day, it needs violent structural change.
Thank you, Sir Martin, and I'm going to use that line you just shared with our audience. I think that was very profound. His next question from Harish Tibrewala, and I was expecting this question to come earlier, and now I see a couple of questions in the same line. The question is your opinion on future of television with OTT, YouTube? Does the concept of TV make sense at all? And how do you see advertising and media shaping on OTT platform?
Well, it depends on how you define TV. I mean, if you modify the word TV to free to air, I think free to air is under extraordinary pressure. You know, we see it here in the UK with ITV. If I asked, maybe not an Indian audience, but if I asked the UK audience, what size do you think ITV is? It's just in the FTSE 100, and I checked its market cap this morning. It's £3 billion. Most people would think, rather like Marks and Spencer, that its market cap was 5, 6, 7. You know, the image of these companies is far greater. But the analogy to Marks and Spencer's is, I think, an important one, because Marks and Spencer's had not adapted its model to online shopping, just like ITV. Easy to say, very difficult to execute, as I said before in relation to the previous question. ITV and Marks and Spencer have not altered their model. And I think free-to-air TV, I mean, Disney, probably run, well, not probably, definitely run by the best media executive, Bob Iger, in the world. And, you know, even Disney has challenges. What's going to happen to ABC? It has Disney Plus, it has its streamer, 50 million subscribers on a product launch during COVID, or just before and during COVID. So quite extraordinary. They managed to launch probably one of the most successful product launches of all time. But within, apart from the cruise business and obviously the theme park business, obviously they have challenges around free-to-air TV. So I think free-to-air TV, I don't think it will go down as rapidly as newspapers did, maybe less so magazines. I think that we saw in the UK, there were 2 years, several years ago, where advertising revenues on newspapers fell in 2 years by 25% and then by another 25%. I don't think the demise of free-to-air television will be as rapid, but it will be more rapid now as a result of COVID-19. And, you know, I've seen statistics during the lockdown periods, you know, that free-to-air TV viewership went up, peaked, and started to go down. And that's of people in my age group. I'm 75, and, you know, people around my age group. The younger age groups also went up, peaked, and came down, but at lower levels, because the propensity or the hours that that young people spend on watching linear TV or free-to-air TV are much less. So I really think there's a problem. Now, the free-to-air TV companies that rely on advertising do have an opportunity because they are still very significant, as the FT article pointed out this morning. And in India, I'm preaching to the choir. You know how important TV is. If they make the medium much more flexible, in America, instead of having these upfront presentations and locking their customers in to inflexible schedules, but they make it more varied. If they think about more flexibility in the product, they may get more traction. It may be that the cost per thousand or the performance of the medium will improve. Having said that, I really believe that the digital channels, again, as a result of acceleration with COVID-19, will make greater inroads after COVID-19 than they did before. So I would say just look at every category: digital radio, podcasting, on the up. Digital outdoor, take the outdoor industry. I did a session with people from the outdoor industry a couple of days ago. Probably about 5% of worldwide advertising. If you look at the numbers, it's extraordinary. The traditional part of the business is down significantly. Even during COVID-19, the digital part of the business is still doing well. And just to give you a crazy little example, you go into an elevator in China. With COVID-19, it's a bit more restricted, but at lunchtime you can alter the copy in the elevator electronically. It's not fixed. If office workers are coming out of a building and they're going to go to lunch and you want to give them ideas about where they can spend their lunchtime, you can do that by altering the copy on a minute by minute, second by second basis. So I would say look at every category and try and differentiate where the digital opportunities are and where they are not.
Thank you, Sir Martin. You mentioned your age. I'm surprised my screen is not firing up with questions. How do you really remain so fit and agile and still running a multi-billion-dollar business? I will ask you that question at the end, Sir Martin. But right now, the question from Narayanan, who's founder of Unmetric, an interesting question about your entrepreneurial journey. And Narayanan wants to know, did you find anything severely missing in the AdTech or MarTech front when you started building your own agency? Or in other words, what would be your recommendation for an entrepreneur who's looking at building his or her own advertising and marketing tech company, services company?
First of all, we're not MarTech, so we're in the service layer. And when I look at it, when I came out of WPP, I sort of looked at the WPP portfolio, which was flattish, but there were parts of it that were on the up and part on the down. And the parts on the up were digital advertising content, the sort of stuff I saw at AKQA or VML, parts of Ogilvy, not all, parts of Wonderman, not all. Then first-party data at Kantar World Panel, great asset, great company, should be public in my view. Maybe Bain Capital will take it public. Great company. The Kantar media business was interesting as well because there were strong growth parts. Again, based around really sort of first-party data, not the nonsense of the Epsilon and Axiom. I'm talking about real first-party data, more Merkle, or maybe the bit of Axiom that IPG left behind. And then the third area was programmatic. So Xaxis, although that's not a disclosed model, or part of it's not a disclosed model, and Essence. Essence, a great media digital agency. So we looked at that, and none of that is MarTech. None of that. I mean, the criteria for me were top line growth, decent margins, and not being disrupted or capable of disruption. I'm not an engineer, so therefore I have a sort of innate concern about my ability to assess the power of technology or its ability to withstand long-term disintermediation. And so we're very much into the service layer. Now, in terms of advice, far be it from me to advise, because we make mistakes every day. I make mistakes every day. The key is to make sure you make more good decisions than bad decisions. The only advice I would give you is, I think the game has changed. And I was asked on another call a few days ago, what's the difference between 1985, when I started WPP with a partner, and when I started S4, a couple of years ago. And whilst I don't think there's, actually it's an interesting point, I don't think there's greater uncertainty in a way, but we can debate that. I think the principles are the same, is to identify areas where the growth is or where the interest is. And at Saatchi's, before wire and plastic products, before WPP, it was all about globalization. Theodore Levitt, 1983 Harvard Business Review article about consumers consuming the same thing everywhere in the same way. I mean, he over-egged the pudding to make the point, but that was his thesis. We grasped that at Saatchi's. Morris grasped it. I grasped it. That's how we built Saatchi. WPP was about continuation of globalization, but it was also about the beginnings of technology in the mid-90s, 1990s, and on to when I left in 2018. So something like 20 years where technology, the technology bucket became as important as the multinational or the global bucket. And then S4, those two models were about value. S4 is about growth. I am just interested in growing the top line. I mean, I have margin constraints. Our margins are 20% after central costs, which, by the way, are very low. We don't have the fat that the holding companies have at the center. I mean, just one interesting point I want to make. I think it was Goldman Sachs wrote an analytical review of WPP recently, and they referred to the fact that WPP's labor costs in the UK were 4% more than the competition. I haven't investigated this precisely, but one of the reasons for that could be that WPP has a considerable amount of overhead that sits in the UK, and that's the reason that its cost base appears to be higher. It's because it has a wodge of overhead. We don't have great wodges of overhead. We're agile and flexible, as we have to be in a 24/7 always on world. So that's in my view, a critical point. But what S4 is about is top line growth, decent margins, and then making sure, and I think this is the real advice to you as you think about ad tech, martech, is really focusing on a position where you don't get disintermediated, that you know, none of us can avoid it, but in the end, but really you want to try and focus, in my view, given my capabilities or lack of them, my colleagues, etc., their capabilities are like, we want to be in the service layer. Google and Facebook are not trying to destroy the agencies. That's nonsense. They're trying to work with the agencies to make sure their platforms, the software companies, you know, Adobe, Salesforce, Oracle, and the hardware companies, Apple, Microsoft, and other software companies, make sure that their products and services are the right ones for the clients. That's what we do. You know, faster, better, cheaper. Better is about understanding the digital ecosystem. The 6 platforms, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Tencent, Alibaba, TikTok, Apple, Microsoft, Adobe, Salesforce, Oracle, Baidu, ByteDance, Twitter, Snap, Pinterest, Netflix, Spotify, Samsung. Understand all those companies and how their different roles play out. So I think that's what you've got to do, in my view. I don't want to get exposed to technological change.
Right. Just a quick shout out to the audience. We've got just, I think, about 5 or 6 minutes of time for one or two questions, and I would reserve the right to ask the last question with your permission, Sir Martin.
Okay.
But this one question from our audience. You spoke of platforms, and you just mentioned Alibaba earlier in the conversation with Anant. You spoke of Reliance Jio, sort of getting into all sort of partnerships. So do you see we are heading towards moving everything on platform like in Alibaba? Is this something that you see India also moving towards? And what would that mean for financial services industry, if you have any views on that?
Well, I think it's inevitable. I mean, these platforms, one of the other things which we haven't discussed on COVID-19 was COVID-19 has accelerated the importance of these platforms. I mean, that has raised already big regulatory issues. And I saw this morning on Squawkbox, another item about the DOJ or the authorities in America taking a hard look at the platforms. We've seen the ACCC in Australia threaten or activate digital taxes. In the UK, there's a digital sales tax on the platforms. I think that's the wrong thing, because post-Brexit, I think the UK should become Singapore on Thames, if you like, or Singapore on steroids, and we should be the home of the tech companies. We shouldn't try and push them away, but that's another story. But these platforms are becoming more and more powerful, and my view is they will continue to be. I mean, a couple of them are already over $1 trillion. Amazon and Apple are both around 1.3, 1.4 trillion. I think both of them probably will get to 2 trillion. And I don't know whether that will incur the rage of the regulator. I mean, if you split them up, Scott Galloway, who talks much more eloquently about this than I do, says if you split Amazon, he believes they should be split up. If you split Amazon into a number of companies, one of which was AWS will be bigger than Amazon in a very short period of time because of the cloud. So I think inevitably they're going to become more dominant and more powerful. And, with size and power comes responsibilities. And they are acting much more responsibly now than they ever have. Facebook have taken on 35,000 people to monitor editorial content. They don't say they're a media company. They still say they're a tech company, but they're behaving increasingly like a media company, and they're coming under more pressure. Some might argue right, some may argue wrong. But anyway, that's the way that it's developing. So the platforms are. Now, on the finance side of it, there is no doubt in my mind that COVID-19 is going to raise the ante in relation to the analog banks, if you like. One of my colleagues, Scott Spirit, used to work with me at WPP, now with me at S4, based in Singapore, came across an article which showed the number of clicks that it took to set up a bank account with one of these new financial platforms. I can't remember the precise number, and the number of clicks that it took to set up an account in an established bank. And the answer was, the difference was like 9 versus 99, something like that. Huge differences. And those of you who have bank accounts in traditional banks know it's a nightmare. I mean, some people I know in banks tell me there are 10 people there to regulate for every person who is customer facing. I don't know whether that's accurate or not, but that's what they say. So these financial institutions, which are very strong, very sound, well built by very successful, ironically, entrepreneurs, actually, over the years, have become atrophied and sclerotic. And this is the way the system works. And these new companies, these new financial platforms are going to be very potent, in my view, very potent competitors. And COVID-19, again, has just demonstrated how significant that change is. And everybody who set up an account on one of these platforms during COVID-19 or has set up, one third of the US population has for the first time through COVID-19 tried online shopping, online grocery shopping, and for essentials. 1/3. They're not going to go back to where they were, to purely physical. Once you've done it, once you've overcome your fear of the technology, fear of setting up, you're going to do it for full time. So I think that's the direction in which it will go.
Thank you so much. So the last question from the audience. Before that, you made a comment earlier on where you said data doesn't destroy creativity; it makes it more efficient and impactful. I think that's very, very profound and correct in today's day and age. So the question from Rajat is that we've heard people talk about never to waste a crisis. So in context of creating sustainable brands using data, analytics, and new technologies, what advice would you give to the CMOs? How should they go about it?
Well, I think it's very difficult for the CMOs to do it on their own. And in fact, the CMO's function really embraces really 3 areas now. And you could say, I'm going to mention 3 functions, 3 verticals inside the company. And you could say the people who head those other 2 verticals, it's the same for them. So the first function is the sales function, the chief sales officer, if there is such a thing. Then there's a CMO, and then there's the CTO, the chief technology officer. The functions that those 3 people do, the verticals, are now, in my view, one. They should be put together. So let me give you the example. We're talking about banks. Inside banks, I'm aware of the big banks that spend, I am told, $10 to $11 billion a year on IT. A lot of that spend is on customer-facing software or indeed hardware, which the CMO doesn't control. And we can debate whether the CMO should control it or not, but that's not the point. So you have a CTO function, a vertical, developing the internal IT systems and how they impact on consumers. At the sales end, you have a sales officer who has a trade budget. Amazon, the addressable market for S4 is 550, 600 billion in media advertising around the world, of which half is digital now. About 500 billion in marketing services, research, data, public relations, sales promotion, that thing. And then finally, about 800 billion in trade budgets. This is discounts, basically. It's about 400 billion in discounts. So the total addressable market is about 1.8 trillion. But people forget, Amazon goes after those trade budgets. What you've got to do, I think, mate, this is the CEO has got to try and get the CMO, the CTO, and the CIO talking together, or maybe even consolidating things. It's a colossal job, but to try, because they all integrate with one another. And if you don't integrate them, the CMO is not responsible for a lot of the decisions that the CTO is making. And what we found over time, also because companies have grown by acquisition, so they've grown by acquisition, they've acquired a company which had different systems, or CMOs inside a business, it's like spaghetti at the back of a television set, all the cables, they've only worried about what the website looks at the front, they haven't worried about the technology. So it's about getting, one packaged goods company that we know has, I think it's 647 different websites, many of whom have different technologies. So how do you bring it all together? So I think you have to look at it holistically. That's one thing. The second thing is CMOs have to be prepared to be change agents. What we've noticed as a result of COVID is there is a lot of activity, a lot of desire to change. I've said about all bets being off, the status quo, this sort of stability having gone, Q2 being a disaster. You might as well get on with heavy disruptive change, even if it disrupts your organization, because the goal is to get through digital transformation. And what we're starting to see is CMOs act more and more as change agents. And that's where we at S4 actually operate most effectively. When organizations have started to come to the decision that they have to change, they have no choice. And that's when we're extremely effective. And what we're seeing now is a tremendous desire to experiment. It might be within housing, it might be with an embedded model where our people, we have 70, 75 people at Mountain View that sit across from Google's offices, not in the offices for security reasons, but that sit across the freeway and are on tap in our embedded model to service their needs. So I think we're seeing a lot of variation in the models, but I think that's what has to happen. You have to bring together sales, marketing, and tech, and you have to start to experiment with all different models. The problem was, after the great financial crisis, zero-based budgeting became very, very fashionable. I mean, it had always been there, but it became, again, very, very fashionable. And I think that caused the problem because marketeers, the marketing resources were cut inside companies, and they had less and less resources internally. That's from about 2008 onwards. 2016, the walls in the walled gardens were put up. The platforms, Amazon, Google, Facebook, said, we're not going to share the data with you, clients, because privacy, brand safety, interference in elections, all sorts of reasons. So there became greater control over data by the platforms. With the nixing of third-party cookies now by Google and by Apple, this means that first-party data becomes more important. And I can do no better than refer you to the Proctor model, which I think is a Netflix model adapted for packaged goods. Remember what I said, Mark Pritchard, the CMO, Chief Brand Officer, Head of Marketing, whatever, talks about 1.3, 1.2 billion consumer profiles. Talks about having to produce data always on, 24/7. Using the data to create that content in an iterative process and pumping it out with the most modern data and data sources and data means. That can be Google, it can be Trade Desk, it can be Facebook, it can be TikTok, it can be Alibaba, it can be Tencent, but that's the model. That's what you have to do. So focus on the first party data because you're not going to get the third party cookies anymore. Focus on personalization at scale and focus on the data that enables programmatic and programmatic itself.
Thank you so much, Sir Martin. I think we are past time, but I have a wildcard question, but I need to ask your permission if I can go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay.
I don't know what it is, Rankesh. I'm changing my mind when I know what it is.
Yeah, you have the option, so you have the wildcard for that as well. So 33 years as a CEO of WPP, built the empire from pretty much nothing, multi-billion pounds organization. And now with S4, you're starting all over. How do you manage to do all of this? How do you manage to get the same energy, drive? What keeps you going?
Well, I suppose, well, it goes back, the roots go deep. My father, I had a very close relationship with my father. My father died in 1989. Just after we did the so-called hostile takeover, became friendly, but of Ogilvy. And so he lived to see the birth of WPP, if you like, and JWT and Ogilvy, but didn't see any more of it. And he instilled in me a love, if that's the right word, or liking for business. He was a retailer. He ran 750 stores, radio and electrical stores in the UK. And he was my closest friend and closest ally, and somebody that I could talk to without fear or favor. And he would give me advice. Knew nothing about the advertising business, but knew people inside out, and had a remarkable gift in understanding people's emotions and desires and weaknesses, etc. And so he really, I was an only son, a spoilt only son of a Jewish family in northwest London, in the ghetto, as I call it, of Golders Green and Mill Hill and Edgware. And I think he instilled in me, he was very ambitious. Sadly for him, my biggest, I have two big regrets. One, that I never went into business with him. I tried and it was dramatically unsuccessful, which was very sad. And the second thing is he didn't have his own business. I think I really regret, because I think he would have been a fabulously successful entrepreneur. But he ran that business that he ran, which was a division of an industrial holding company. It was a retail company and an industrial holding company. He ran it as though it was his own. And he taught me to admire and respect that. And I think, that's the thing that drives me. And I love what I do. Some people say, I'm not balanced enough, and I focus too much on the business and not enough on the other two buckets of life, your career, your family first, your career, and then society. And it's very difficult to balance all those three. But the answer on S4 is I didn't want to go and play golf when I left WPP. Much as it's commented on, I chose at the end of the day to leave WPP because of the way I thought the chairman in particular and the board dealt with the situation. But I chose to go, and so what I wanted to do was to start something again that was a new age, new era, tech-led model, and which I've tried to describe in answering some of your questions, Rakesh. And what I want to see, there are two objectives here. One is to create that new model, and the second is to disintermediate and disrupt the old model. So this is, if I chose very grand examples, this is like, a Tesla in the advertising and marketing services industry. We believe, and my colleagues, whether it be Victor Knapp and Wesley Tahar at Media Monks, or Pete Kim and Chris Martin at Mighty Hive, or Scott Spirit, who worked with me at WPP, or Michelle de Rijk at WPP, or Peter Rademacher, who's the CFO that we brought out of Media Monks to run the finances of the group. We all passionately believe in the importance of this model and disruption. So there's a messianic zeal here, and so you asked me what drives me, or what drives us. It's making sure that this model succeeds. We have brand awareness, we have brand trial, we now have conversion at scale in a couple of instances. Our two biggest clients our revenues are running at about $400 million. We'll hit close to $500 million in short time. And two of those clients are well in excess of 5% of our revenues. We call them Whoppers, but we have to get more Whoppers. We have to get more conversion at scale. And the reason for that is we want to prove that this model works at scale. We know that it works at scale because of the two examples I've just quoted. Now we have to get a large number activating access to the same model. So that's what drives Martin, Rakesh. It's trying to demonstrate that this works. But by the way, I should say, I've got on my little chat line, I haven't read the chat line because it would have blotted out your face, Rakesh, but there are 59 there. We may have covered about 5 or 6. If anybody wants to send me their question to martin@s4capital.com, so that's martin@s4capital.com, I will try and answer them. Don't send them all to me at the same time, but I'll try and get through them.
Thank you so much for that, Sir Martin. I'm sure our audience would be delighted. Ashish, can you hear me?
I've lost you on your sound.
Ashish, are you there?
Yeah, I'm there, Rakesh.
Can you hear me?
I think sir will get it in a minute. Sir, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Ashish.
Yeah, Rakesh, you have to speak
Can you
again.
hear me, sir? Are you able to hear me
No, it's
now?
not coming through.
Okay, I'll get Anant. I think it's time for me to get.
Yeah. So,
You need a few more rupees in the slot.
Anant, are you able
Anant,
to
I
hear
have to
me?
depend on you.
Hello.
Yeah, Anant, I have to depend on you
Yeah,
now.
I can hear you.
Yeah. Sir Martin, can you hear us? Me and Anant?
I can hear you, Ashish. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. Rakesh, you have to
Hello,
try
can you hear
once
me?
more, otherwise we'll hand over to Anant.
Okay, I will give it a last
No,
try.
it's not coming through.
Sir, can you hear me? No, it's not. So maybe Anant, if you can hear me.
Try Anant. Can you make it, Anant?
Yeah. Yeah, I can hear everybody.
I can hear you, Anant.
Martin,
I
can you hear me?
But I can't hear
perfect.
Rakesh for some
Okay.
reason.
So anyway, since you can't hear Rakesh,
No.
on behalf of all of us, thank you so much, Martin, and see you soon.
Okay, very good. God bless you, Anant. Stay safe and well.
See you around.
Regards to everybody.
Yep,
Thank
see
you,
you around.
Rakesh.
Bye.
God bless. Thank you, Ashish.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Stay safe
On
and
behalf
well.
of on behalf of Rakesh and on behalf of Future Generali, thanks a ton, Sir Martin, and thanks a bunch, Anant, for being able to host it. Any final
Yes.
views if you want to kind of share with us before you take leave for today? Sir Martin and Anant, any final views you have?
No, other than
No,
I enjoyed it, and I hope that everybody is safe and well. I know things in Mumbai are tough, and I hope that all our friends in Mumbai and their families are safe and well.
Right. Thank you.
God bless.
Cheers, Martin.
God bless.
Catch you around.
Ciao, ciao.
See you around.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And,
Thank you, sir.
Ashish,
Thank
are
you,
able to
Anant.
hear me?
Thank you.
Yes,
See
I
you.
can hear you. Thank you. Thank you, Sir Martin.
Thank you very
And
much.
thanks, Anant.
Ciao.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. See you, sir. Bye.
Bye.
Rakesh, over to you.
Yeah, so I hope everybody's able to hear me. That's sort of just
I
lost my
can
voice,
hear
I
you.
guess.
I can
In
hear
the nick
you
of
very
time. Let me
clearly.
just. Okay, awesome. So that brings us to the close of the show. What I was saying earlier on when I think my voice didn't travel to Sir Martin, I think those are pearls of wisdom in today's session. A lot that he shared with all of us. I think what he said in the end really stays with me, and I'm sure for a lot of questions that that were not raised, maybe there were some answers in there. What Sir Martin said about how he has gone about his life, his career, his passion. And that's pretty much, I think, brings us to the end of the show. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the session. Time for me to pick up 2 lucky winners and thank our community support partners. So the 2 lucky winners for today are Mr. Lux Narayanan, asked a question about setting up your own AdTech, MarTech company, and Harish Tibrewala for your question on future of television channel. So congratulations to you both. I request you to please send in your email IDs to us so we can ship the voucher to you. Thank you once again for joining us. And again, as always, a big thank you to all our community support partners, Adgully, Resulticks, Paul Reiter, and Netcore for being with us and for helping us spread the message. I'm going to see you on Friday, 26th of June with Mr. Arjun Malhotra. So stay in touch, keep a track, like us on the Facebook, follow us to get the notifications, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.